The first gunshot split the dawn like a thunderclap, pulling Tabitha Vance from her fitful sleep. She sat bolt upright in the stagecoach, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird, wondering if she'd dreamed the sound. The second shot confirmed she hadn't, and the stagecoach lurched to a halt, throwing her against the opposite seat. Texas, 1873. This was hardly the welcome she'd expected. "Stay inside, miss," the driver shouted, his voice tight with fear. "Could be bandits." Tabitha clutched her carpetbag to her chest, trying to control her breathing. 24 hours ago, she'd been in Boston, preparing to board a train west. Now she was in the middle of nowhere, Texas, possibly about to be robbed or worse. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd come to civilize the uncivilized, only to find herself in danger before she'd even arrived at her destination. A third shot rang out, followed by the sound of hoofbeats galloping away. After several tense minutes, the driver called down that it was safe to continue. The journey resumed, but Tabitha couldn't shake the feeling that this was an omen. Perhaps taking this position had been a mistake. When Silas Montgomery, a wealthy Texas cattle baron, had come to Boston seeking a governess for his wild niece and nephew, Tabitha had seen it as her chance to escape the stifling propriety of Boston society and the painful memories that haunted her there. But Montgomery had been less than forthcoming about the true nature of her duties. "It's not just the children who need taming, Miss Vance," he had told her during their last meeting before her departure. "My foreman, Russell Blackburn, is the best cattle hand in Texas, but the meanest man I've ever known. He terrifies the men, scares off every decent woman for 50 miles, and has a temper like a wounded grizzly. If the children are ever going to have a chance at civilization, he needs to be civilized too." Tabitha had stared at him, bewildered. "And you expect me to tame this man?" Montgomery had smiled. "You tamed an entire classroom of unruly boys in that Boston school of yours. If anyone can bring Blackburn to heel, it's you." Now, bouncing along in the stagecoach, Tabitha wondered if she'd been mad to accept. She was a schoolteacher, not a miracle worker. What did she know about taming wild cowboys? By midday, the stagecoach rolled into Cottonwood Creek, a dusty frontier town that seemed to consist of little more than a main street, a few side alleys, and buildings that looked ready to collapse in the next strong wind. Tabitha stepped down from the coach, her legs wobbly after days of travel, and squinted in the harsh Texas sun. "Miss Vance." She turned to see a young man in his early 20s holding the reins of a wagon. He had a friendly, freckled face beneath his wide-brimmed hat. "Yes, that's me." "I'm Charlie. Mr. Montgomery sent me to fetch you." He took her trunk and carpetbag, loading them carefully into the wagon. "It's another 2 hours to the ranch, I'm afraid. Hope you're not too tired from your journey." "I'll manage," Tabitha said, though in truth she was exhausted. As Charlie helped her onto the wagon seat, he gave her a curious look. "If you don't mind me asking, miss, what brings a Boston lady like yourself all the way out here?" "I'm to be governess to Mr. Montgomery's niece and nephew," she replied, straightening her travel-wrinkled skirt. Charlie whistled low. "Those two little wildcats, you've got your work cut out for you." He clicked to the horses and the wagon lurched forward. "And then there's Blackburn." "What about Mr. Blackburn?" she asked, trying to sound casual. Charlie's face darkened. Well, he's not the sort of man ladies like to talk about. Mean as a rattlesnake with a toothache, that one. Half the ranch hands have quit because of him, and the other half are too scared to. Only reason he's still foreman is because he's the best there is with cattle." "I see," Tabitha said quietly, her stomach knotting with apprehension. "There was a lady before you," Charlie continued, seemingly oblivious to her discomfort. "Miss Prescott. She was supposed to teach the little ones, but she left after just 2 weeks. Said she couldn't abide Blackburn's foul temper and worse language. And how many governesses have there been? 4 in the past year, Charlie replied cheerfully. You're the 5th. Tabitha swallowed hard. She'd faced difficult situations before. Her classroom in Boston had included the sons of dock workers and laborers, boys who came to school with dirty faces and dirtier vocabularies. But this was different. This wasn't just about teaching manners to children. This was about challenging a grown man who, by all accounts, was as dangerous as he was disagreeable. Tell me more about the children, she said, hoping to change the subject. Emma's 8, Billy's 6. Their mama, Mr. Montgomery's sister, died of fever last spring. Their pa had already passed on in the war, so Mr. Montgomery took them in. They're good kids at heart, just wild as March hares and too smart for their own good. The conversation drifted to other topics as they traveled, with Charlie pointing out landmarks and sharing local gossip. Tabitha only half listened, her mind preoccupied with what awaited her at the Montgomery Ranch. The ranch house, when they finally arrived, was grander than she'd expected, a sprawling 2-story structure with a wide porch and tall windows. It looked like an island of civilization in the vast, untamed landscape. Several outbuildings, corrals, and a bunkhouse completed the ranch compound. As the wagon pulled up to the house, Tabitha spotted 2 small figures racing around the corner of the barn, whooping like wild Indians. The boy was barefoot, his shirt untucked and his hair a tangle of sun-bleached curls. The girl wore a dress that had once been fine but was now stained and torn at the hem, her dark braids coming undone. "Those would be your charges," Charlie said with a grin. Before Tabitha could respond, the children spotted the wagon and came to an abrupt halt. They stared at her with identical expressions of suspicion. "Another one," the boy Billy said loudly. "Uncle Silas said she's from Boston," Emma replied, studying Tabitha with narrowed eyes. "Boston ladies don't last long here," Billy declared with all the wisdom his 6 years could muster. Tabitha stepped down from the wagon without waiting for Charlie's assistance. "I'm not just any Boston lady," she said firmly. "I'm Miss Vance, and I'm your new governess." The children exchanged glances, clearly unimpressed. "Miss Prescott said the same thing," Emma pointed out. "She left crying." "I don't cry easily," Tabitha replied, meeting the girl's gaze steadily. A commotion from the direction of the corral caught their attention. Angry male voices rose in the hot afternoon air, followed by the sound of something or someone hitting the ground hard. "That'll be Blackburn," Charlie muttered, nodding toward the source of the disturbance. Breaking in the new ranch hands along with the new horses. Tabitha turned to look. A group of men stood around the corral, where a magnificent black stallion was rearing and bucking, trying to dislodge its rider. The rider, a tall, broad-shouldered man in a dusty black hat, stayed firmly seated, moving with the horse as if they were one being. Even from a distance, there was something compelling about the way he commanded the animal. "Is that him?" she asked, unable to look away. "No, madam," Charlie said. "That's just Miguel. He's our best rider. Blackburn's the one standing by the fence, the big fella with the red beard." Tabitha shifted her gaze to the figure Charlie indicated. He stood with his back to them, but even from behind, he was intimidating, well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders like a bull and arms crossed over his chest. His stance radiated contempt for the world around him. As if sensing her scrutiny, the man suddenly turned. Even across the distance, their eyes met, and Tabitha felt a jolt of something like electricity run through her. His face was partly shadowed by his hat, but she could make out a strong jaw covered in russet beard, and eyes that seemed to burn even from afar. For a moment, Neither of them moved. Then he deliberately turned his back on her, dismissing her presence as unworthy of his attention. Tabitha felt her cheeks burn, partly with embarrassment, partly with indignation. So this was Russell Blackburn, the man she was supposed to civilize. Well, he would soon learn that Tabitha Vance was not so easily dismissed. "Miss Vance," a deep voice called from the porch, breaking the moment. Silas Montgomery descended the steps, looking much as he had in Boston, impeccably dressed despite the frontier setting, his silver hair and mustache neatly trimmed. "Welcome to Montgomery Ranch. I see you've already met the children." "Yes, Mr. Montgomery," she replied, tearing her gaze away from Blackburn's back. "We were just getting acquainted." "Excellent," Montgomery said, though his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Charlie will take your things to your room. Children, help Miss Vance get settled, then show her around the ranch. I'm afraid I have business to attend to in town." With that, he was gone, climbing into a waiting buggy without another word. Tabitha watched him go, feeling suddenly abandoned. "He's always busy," Emma said, seemingly reading her thoughts. "Come on. Your room's upstairs." The children led her into the house, which was as impressive inside as out. Fine furniture, carpets, and artwork spoke of Montgomery's wealth and Eastern tastes. Tabitha's room was spacious and comfortable, with a large bed, a writing desk, a washstand, and a wardrobe. A window overlooked the ranch yard, providing a clear view of the corral where Blackburn still stood watching the riders. "Dinner's at 6, Emma informed her as Charlie deposited her trunk. "Uncle Silas won't be back, but Mr. Blackburn always eats with us when Uncle's away." Tabitha's heart sank. "Always?" "Yep," Billy chimed in. "He doesn't talk much, but he stares a lot. Miss Prescott used to cry about it." "Well, I won't be crying," Tabitha said firmly. "Now, why don't you show me the rest of the house while I unpack?" The tour was brief and chaotic, with the children rushing from room to room, offering cryptic comments rather than explanations. They showed her the schoolroom, a sunny space with desks, books, and maps where her formal duties would take place. Then they dragged her outside to see the stables, chicken coop, and kitchen garden. "Stay away from the bunkhouse," Emma warned as they passed the long, low building where the ranch hands lived. "Mr. Blackburn says ladies have no business there." "Does he indeed?" Tabitha murmured, filing that away for future reference. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the ranch yard, a bell rang from the back porch. "That's for supper," Billy said, already running toward the house. Tabitha followed more slowly, taking a moment to compose herself. Her first encounter with Russell Blackburn loomed, and she was determined to make a better impression than she had from afar. She changed from her travel-stained clothes into a simple blue dress, her brown hair neatly pinned up. She might not be a beauty, but she knew how to present herself with dignity. When she entered the dining room, the children were already seated, fidgeting impatiently. The table was set for 4, with Mrs. Garcia, the housekeeper whom she'd briefly met earlier, bringing in a tureen of stew. There was no sign of Blackburn. "Where's Mr. Blackburn?" she asked, taking her seat. "Probably still washing up," Mrs. Garcia replied. "That man may be rough as a cob, but he never comes to table dirty." As if summoned by her words, the door swung open and Russell Blackburn strode in. Up close, he was even more imposing than he had appeared from a distance. He'd changed his shirt and washed, but there was still trail dust on his boots and a wildness about him that no amount of scrubbing could tame. His beard was neatly trimmed, framing a mouth set in a permanent scowl. But it was his eyes that captured Tabitha's attention, a startling, intense blue beneath heavy brows. Those eyes swept over her now, assessing and dismissing her in the same glance. "Miss Vance," he said, his voice a low rumble. Hope you'll last longer than the last one." Without waiting for her response, he took his seat at the foot of the table, opposite her position at the head. "I intend to, Mr. Blackburn," she replied coolly. He grunted, reaching for the bread. "They all say that." The meal was an uncomfortable affair. The children, normally boisterous according to Mrs. Garcia, were subdued in Blackburn's presence. They answered Tabitha's attempts at conversation with monosyllables, occasionally glancing nervously at the foreman. For his part, Blackburn ate with the efficiency of a man who viewed food as fuel rather than pleasure, saying nothing unless directly addressed. "Mr. Blackburn," Tabitha said finally, unable to bear the silence any longer, "I understand you've been with the Montgomery Ranch for some time." He looked up, those intense blue eyes fixing on her face. 5 years. And you're from? Nowhere you'd know. I'm quite well traveled, Mr. Blackburn. You might be surprised, he snorted. Doubt that. Boston ladies don't travel to the kinds of places I've been. And what kinds of places are those? The kind decent women shouldn't even know exist. His gaze challenged her to pursue the topic. Tabitha refused to be baited. I see. Well, I hope that during my time here we can establish a cordial working relationship. After all, we'll be seeing quite a bit of each other. Will we? Of course. I'll be teaching the children every day, and you dine with the family regularly. Teaching them what? He demanded, suddenly leaning forward. How to talk fancy and pour tea. They don't need that out here. They need to know how to survive. Education is survival, Mr. Blackburn, she countered. The world is changing. Even in Texas, children need more than practical skills. They need to read, write, calculate. They can already do all that, he interrupted. Emma's smart as a whip with figures, and Billy's reading better than half my men. Tabitha blinked in surprise. This wasn't what she'd expected to hear from the allegedly uncivilized foreman. Well, that's excellent, but there's still history, geography, science. Billy perked up. Like experiments and things that blow up. Some science involves controlled reactions, yes, Tabitha conceded. Though that's not all. Can we blow something up tomorrow? The boy asked eagerly. Absolutely not, Tabitha said firmly. Why not? Blackburn challenged, the ghost of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth for the first time. Seems like a practical application of scientific principles to me. Mr. Blackburn, I would appreciate it if you didn't undermine my authority with the children, Tabitha said, struggling to maintain her composure. Just offering my educational opinion, Miss Vance, he replied, the almost smile vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. After all, Mr. Montgomery hired you partly on my recommendation. Your recommendation, she repeated, startled. He showed me your letter of application. I said you sounded too proper to last a month, but at least you had experience with boys who weren't born with silver spoons in their mouths. He pushed back from the table. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do. With that, he was gone, leaving Tabitha staring after him in confusion and annoyance. She'd come expecting to civilize a brute, but Russell Blackburn was proving to be something far more complex. He was undeniably rude and abrasive, but there was intelligence behind those fierce blue eyes and perhaps something else, something wounded. He's not always that nice, Emma said solemnly, breaking into Tabitha's thoughts. That was him being nice. Tabitha couldn't help asking. The girl nodded. He didn't swear once, and he talked to you for more than a minute without walking away. That's practically friendly for Mr. Blackburn. I see, Tabitha murmured. If that was Russell Blackburn being nice, she had her work cut out for her indeed. As she helped the children prepare for bed that evening, a task that involved considerably more chasing and cajoling than she was accustomed to, Tabitha found herself repeatedly drawn to the window that overlooked the ranch yard. More than once, she spotted Blackburn moving between buildings, issuing orders to the ranch hands, checking on the livestock. Even in the gathering darkness, there was something magnetic about his presence, a force that seemed to bend the very air around him. Putting such thoughts aside, she tucked the children in with a promise to begin proper lessons in the morning, then retired to her own room. She sat at the writing desk, intending to record her first impressions in her journal, but the words wouldn't come. How could she describe Russell Blackburn? The man defied easy categorization. Mean, certainly. Intimidating without question. But also intelligent, observant, and if his concern for the children's education was genuine, perhaps not entirely the brute she'd been led to believe. Tabitha closed her journal without writing a word. She would reserve judgment for now. After all, this was only her first day. There was plenty of time to figure out how to tame Russell Blackburn, or whether he could be tamed at all. The first week passed in a blur of activity. Tabitha established a routine with the children, beginning lessons each morning after breakfast and continuing until noon. The afternoons were more flexible, with time for outdoor activities, practical skills, and supervised play. To her surprise, both Emma and Billy proved to be bright and eager students once she found ways to channel their boundless energy into learning. She saw little of Blackburn during daylight hours. He was always up and gone before dawn, returning only for the evening meal, which he ate in stony silence before disappearing again. Occasionally, she glimpsed him from the schoolroom window, striding across the ranch yard or working with the cattle in the distant pastures. It was during these moments, when she thought herself unobserved, that she studied him. There was a grace to his movements that belied his size, a confidence that spoke of a man completely at home in his environment. Whatever else Russell Blackburn might be, he was very good at his job. On her 8th day at the ranch, Tabitha decided it was time to expand her teaching beyond the confines of the schoolroom. The weather was fine, and the children were restless after a morning of arithmetic. "Today," she announced, closing the lesson book with a decisive snap, "we're going to learn about botany." "What's that?" Billy asked suspiciously. "The study of plants. We're going to collect specimens from around the ranch and identify them." Emma looked skeptical. "That sounds boring." "Not at all," Tabitha assured her. "It's like being a detective. Each plant has its own story to tell, its own special qualities. Some are useful for medicine, some for food, some for building materials. And knowing which plants are poisonous could save your life someday." That caught their interest. Armed with collecting bags and a guidebook to Texas flora, they set out across the ranch grounds. Tabitha was careful to keep well away from the working areas, not wanting to disrupt the ranch hands' activities or encounter Blackburn before she was ready. Their botanical expedition was going well until Billy spotted a particularly interesting plant growing near the creek that ran along the property's edge. "Look at this one, Miss Vance," he called, already reaching for it. "Wait." Tabitha hurried over, recognizing the distinctive leaves of poison ivy. "Don't touch that, Billy. That's poison ivy. It will make your skin itch and blister if you touch it." "How do you know?" the boy challenged. "Because I've studied botany," she replied, "and because I once had a student who didn't listen when I warned him about poison ivy. He was miserable for days." "The boy's right to question you," a familiar deep voice said from behind them. Tabitha turned to find Blackburn approaching on horseback, his expression unreadable beneath the shadow of his hat. "Excuse me," she said, bristling at the intrusion. "I said he's right to question you." Blackburn dismounted in one fluid motion, tying his horse to a nearby tree. "Out here, taking someone's word can get you killed. Better to know for yourself." He knelt beside the plant, pointing but not touching. "See these leaves, Billy? Leaves of 3, let it be, that's how you remember, and see how they're shiny. Another warning sign. Now look at this one over here. He moved a few feet away to another plant. Looks similar, but the leaves are different. This one's safe. Tabitha was surprised and somewhat chagrined at the impromptu lesson. "Thank you for the additional information, Mr. Blackburn," she said stiffly. He glanced up at her, those piercing blue eyes seeing far too much. "You don't know much about Texas plants, do you, Miss Vance?" "I'm learning," she admitted. "My botanical knowledge is more theoretical than practical at this point." To her surprise, he didn't mock her. Instead, he nodded as if her honesty had earned a small measure of respect. "Theory's a starting point, but out here, practical knowledge keeps you alive." He straightened up, his considerable height forcing Tabitha to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. "If you're going to teach them about plants, you should learn from someone who knows the local flora." "Are you offering to teach me, Mr. Blackburn?" she asked, unable to keep the surprise from her voice. Something flickered in his eyes, amusement, perhaps, or challenge. "No, Miss Vance. But Mrs. Garcia knows every plant that grows within 50 miles. Ask her." With that, he swung back onto his horse and rode away, leaving Tabitha to stare after him, unsure whether to feel offended or grateful for the advice. "Mr. Blackburn knows a lot about plants," Emma said thoughtfully as they watched him go. "He showed us which berries are good to eat and which ones make you sick." "Did he now?" Tabitha murmured, filing away this new piece of information about the enigmatic foreman. That evening, she sought out Mrs. Garcia in the kitchen. The housekeeper was rolling out dough for tomorrow's biscuits, her capable hands working with practiced efficiency. "Mr. Blackburn suggested I speak with you about local plants," Tabitha said, feeling somewhat awkward. "The children and I were collecting specimens today, and I realized my knowledge is limited." Mrs. Garcia looked up, surprise and something like approval in her dark eyes. "He said that, did he? Well, well. Is that significant?" the older woman chuckled. "Russell Blackburn doesn't send people to me unless he thinks they're worth teaching. Take it as a compliment, Miss Vance." Tabitha wasn't sure what to make of that. "So will you help me? I'd like to be better prepared before I take the children out again." "Of course. I've been gathering plants for cooking and medicine since I was younger than Emma. My grandmother was a curandera, a healer. She taught me." Mrs. Garcia wiped flour from her hands. "We can go out tomorrow after breakfast before you start lessons. I'll show you what's what." True to her word, Mrs. Garcia took Tabitha on a tour of the ranch grounds the next morning, pointing out edible plants, medicinal herbs, and dangerous species to avoid. It was a fascinating lesson, and Tabitha filled several pages of her notebook with drawings and descriptions. "The children said Mr. Blackburn taught them about plants too," she remarked as they headed back to the house. "He knows more than most," Mrs. Garcia confirmed. "That man could survive anywhere with nothing but a knife. He's lived rough most of his life. What do you know about his background?" Tabitha asked, trying to sound casual. The housekeeper gave her a knowing look. "Not much. He hasn't told me himself, and that's precious little. I know he fought for the Confederacy, though he doesn't seem to hold with their cause. Lost his family young. Drifted a lot before coming here." She paused. "Why do you ask?" "Professional curiosity," Tabitha replied too quickly. "Mr. Montgomery seems to think I should improve Mr. Blackburn's manners." Mrs. Garcia laughed outright at that. "Good luck, miss. Many have tried, all have failed. That man is what he is. Best just to accept it." "I don't believe that," Tabitha said firmly. "Everyone can change, given the right motivation and environment. And you think you can provide that?" "I can try," she said, more confidently than she felt. Mrs. Garcia studied her for a long moment, then shrugged. "You wouldn't be the first woman to try to gentle Russell Blackburn, but you might be the first he'd listen to." "What makes you say that?" "He watches you." the housekeeper said simply. "When you're with the children or reading on the porch in the evening." "He doesn't think anyone notices, but I do. He's curious about you, Miss Vance, and Russell Blackburn doesn't waste curiosity on people he's dismissed." Tabitha felt her cheeks warm at this revelation. "I'm sure you're mistaken." "I'm sure I'm not," Mrs. Garcia replied with a smile. "But time will tell, won't it?" That afternoon, armed with her new botanical knowledge, Tabitha took the children on another specimen-gathering expedition. This time, she confidently identified various plants, explaining their properties and uses just as Mrs. Garcia had explained them to her. They were so engrossed in their collecting that they didn't notice the approaching riders until they were almost upon them. Tabitha looked up to see Blackburn and several ranch hands returning from what appeared to be a boundary check. The men rode past with nods of greeting, but Blackburn reined in his horse beside them. "Learning about the local plants, I see," he remarked, his gaze taking in their collection bags and Tabitha's notebook. "Yes, Mrs. Garcia was very helpful," Tabitha replied. "Thank you for suggesting I speak with her." He acknowledged this with a slight inclination of his head, then turned his attention to the children. "Found anything interesting?" Eagerly, Billy and Emma showed him their specimens, chattering about what they'd learned. Tabitha watched in amazement as Blackburn listened patiently, occasionally correcting a misconception or adding a detail Mrs. Garcia hadn't mentioned. There was nothing in his manner now of the surly, taciturn man who glowered through dinner each night. "You're good with them," she said when the children ran ahead to examine a flowering cactus. Blackburn's expression closed immediately as if she'd caught him in some shameful act. "They're good kids, just need proper handling, like your horses," she asked, unable to resist the dig. To her surprise, a corner of his mouth quirked up. "Smarter than horses, more like wolf cubs, wild by nature but capable of loyalty if you earn their trust." "And how does one earn their trust in your experience?" "Consistency. Honesty. Never promising what you can't deliver." His eyes, startlingly direct, met hers. "Children can spot a fake at 50 paces." "I'm not a fake, Mr. Blackburn," she said quietly. "No," he agreed after a moment. "I don't believe you are, but you are out of your element, Miss Vance. This isn't Boston." "I'm well aware of that," she replied, thinking of the vast differences between her former life and her current situation. "But sometimes being out of one's element is educational." "That it is," he said, something like respect flickering in his eyes. "For what it's worth, you're doing better with them than the others did." Before she could respond to this unexpected compliment, he clicked to his horse and rode away, leaving her staring after him once again. That night at dinner, Blackburn was his usual taciturn self, but Tabitha caught him watching her once or twice when he thought her attention was elsewhere. Mrs. Garcia's words came back to her. "He's curious about you." The thought was oddly thrilling. The next 2 weeks fell into a pattern. Mornings were devoted to traditional lessons, afternoons to more practical education. Silas Montgomery returned from his business trip, stayed a few days, then left again, seemingly satisfied with Tabitha's progress with the children. During his brief presence, Blackburn made himself scarce, dining with the ranch hands rather than at the main house. "They don't get along, Uncle Silas and Mr. Blackburn," Emma confided one afternoon as they watched the foreman ride out shortly after Montgomery's return. "They argue a lot when they think we can't hear." "About what?" Tabitha asked, her curiosity piqued. The girl shrugged. "Ranch stuff, mostly. Uncle wants to sell more land, but Mr. Blackburn says it's not a good idea, and sometimes about us, me and Billy. Uncle says we need to learn proper manners so we can go to school in San Antonio next year, but Mr. Blackburn says we belong here." Tabitha considered this. It was the first she'd heard of Montgomery's plans to send the children away to school. "What do you think, Emma? Do you want to go to school in San Antonio?" "No," the girl said vehemently. "I want to stay here with Mr. Blackburn and Mrs. Garcia and Charlie and all the horses. San Antonio is boring, and the girls there laugh at my accent." That evening, Tabitha broached the subject with Montgomery over dinner. "Emma mentioned something about your plans to send the children to school in San Antonio," she said carefully. "I wasn't aware that was your intention." Montgomery set down his wine glass, his expression guarded. "It's the logical next step in their education. They need more than a ranch can offer them. With respect, sir, I believe they're thriving here. They're bright, curious children who are learning rapidly. A change of environment might be disruptive at this stage." "Miss Vance," Montgomery said, his tone cooling, "while I value your professional opinion, the decision regarding my niece and nephew's education rests with me. I hired you to prepare them for formal schooling, not to question my plans." "Of course," Tabitha said, chastened. "I only meant to suggest that perhaps another year here with structured lessons might better prepare them for the transition." Montgomery studied her for a moment, then sighed. "You've been talking to Blackburn, haven't you? This sounds like his argument." "No," she said truthfully. "I formed this opinion based on my own observations. But if Mr. Blackburn shares my view, perhaps there's merit to it." "Russell Blackburn is an excellent foreman," Montgomery said dismissively, "but he knows nothing about what children of good family need. The sooner Emma and Billy learn to move in proper society, the better their prospects will be." The conversation left Tabitha troubled. She couldn't help feeling that Montgomery's plans had less to do with the children's welfare and more to do with his own ambitions. But it wasn't her place to challenge him directly. For now, she would focus on giving Emma and Billy the best education she could, while considering how to advocate for their happiness more effectively. Montgomery left again 2 days later, headed for Austin on business. The atmosphere at the ranch immediately relaxed, with Blackburn resuming his place at the dinner table and the children returning to their more boisterous selves. One evening, about a week after Montgomery's departure, Tabitha was sitting on the porch after the children had gone to bed, enjoying the cool night air and the spectacular display of stars overhead. The vastness of the Texas sky still took her breath away, so different from the narrow slice of heaven visible between Boston's buildings. She was so lost in contemplation that she didn't hear Blackburn approach until he spoke. "Mind if I join you?" Startled, she looked up to find him standing at the bottom of the porch steps, his expression hidden in the shadows. "Of course not," she replied, gesturing to the empty chair beside her. He settled his large frame into it with surprising grace, stretching his long legs out before him. For several minutes they sat in silence, both gazing up at the star-strewn sky. "Different from what you're used to, I expect," he said finally. "Very. In Boston, the buildings block much of the view and the city lights dim what stars you can see. Out here it's overwhelming," he nodded. "First time I saw a sky like this, I was 16. Made me feel small." "Where was that?" she asked, seizing the opening to learn more about him. "West Texas. I was driving cattle from San Antonio to Fort Worth." He fell silent again, and Tabitha thought he'd closed the topic. But then he continued, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "I'd never been more than 10 miles from home before that. Thought I knew everything there was to know. That sky taught me different." "Is that when you decided to become a rancher?" He gave a short laugh. "No, madam. Took a lot more lessons before I settled on this life. War, wandering, working jobs I'm not proud of." He glanced at her. "You don't want to hear about all that." "Actually, I do," she said honestly, Blackburn studied her face in the dim light spilling from the parlor windows. Whatever he saw there seemed to satisfy him, for he leaned back in his chair and began to talk. Not freely Russell Blackburn would never be a man of many words, but more openly than he had before. He told her of growing up in a small farming community in East Texas, the son of a blacksmith. Of losing both parents to typhoid when he was 14 and making his own way thereafter. Of reluctantly joining the Confederate Army at 18 because it was join or be conscripted, and at least volunteering meant choosing his regiment. Didn't believe in the cause, he said flatly. Slavery's an abomination, but I believed in defending my home state against invasion. That's how I saw it then, anyway. The war had hardened him, taught him to kill to survive. After Appomattox, he drifted west, taking whatever work came his way: cowhand, bounty hunter, even a brief, disastrous stint as a town marshal. "How did you end up here?" Tabitha asked when he fell silent. "Montgomery hired me to handle a rustler problem 5 years back. I dealt with it. He offered me the foreman position afterward." He shrugged. "Seemed as good a place as any to stop drifting. And the children, how did you become so invested in them?" Blackburn was quiet for so long that Tabitha thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and rough with emotion. "Their father was a good man, fought beside me in the war. When he died, he made me promise to look out for his family if anything happened to him. Never thought I'd have to keep that promise." He sighed heavily. "When Montgomery brought them here after their mother passed, they were broken. Didn't talk, didn't play, just existed. Reminded me too much of myself at that age." "So you helped them heal," Tabitha said softly. "Tried to, taught them to ride. Let them help with the calves and foals. Showed them the land. Figured if they could connect to something bigger than their grief, they might find their way back." His hands, large and calloused, tightened on the arms of the chair. "And they did. They're strong, those two, survivors. You care for them very much," she observed. "Someone has to," he said grimly. "Montgomery sees them as obligations, not children. Means well, but he's got no idea what they need. Like sending them to school in San Antonio," Tabitha suggested. Blackburn's head snapped toward her. "He told you about that?" "Emma did first. Then I asked him about it." She hesitated. "I suggested they might benefit from another year here with structured education. And what did he say to that?" "He implied I'd been influenced by you," she admitted. "Said you know nothing about what children of good family need." Blackburn snorted. "Typical. Man thinks money and social position are all that matter." He leaned forward, suddenly intense. "Those children need stability, Miss Vance. They need to know they belong somewhere, that they won't be shipped off when they become inconvenient. They need to build confidence in who they are before they face a world that will try to make them something else." Tabitha was struck by the passion in his voice, the depth of understanding in his words. This was not the unfeeling brute she'd been led to expect. This was a man of profound emotional intelligence, however roughly it might be expressed. "I agree with you," she said quietly, "and I'll do what I can to convince Mr. Montgomery to reconsider his plans." Blackburn studied her face, as if searching for deception. Finding none, he nodded once, a gesture that carried the weight of a solemn pact between them. "Thank you," he said simply. They lapsed into silence again, but it was a different quality of silence now, companionable, almost comfortable. When Tabitha finally rose to retire for the night, Blackburn stood as well, a gesture of courtesy she wouldn't have expected from him a few weeks ago. "Good night, Mr. Blackburn," she said, pausing at the door. "Russell," he replied. "If we're to be allies in this, you might as well use my given name." The offer startled her. "Very well, Russell, and you may call me Tabitha if you wish." He nodded, the ghost of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Good night then, Tabitha." The sound of her name in his deep voice followed her up the stairs, echoing in her mind as she prepared for bed. Something had shifted between them tonight, a mutual respect born of shared concern for the children. It wasn't friendship exactly, but it was a beginning. As she drifted off to sleep, Tabitha realized with a start that she hadn't thought about Boston or the painful memories she'd left behind there in days. Somehow, without her noticing, Texas had begun to feel like where she belonged. The next morning dawned clear and hot, promising another scorching summer day. Tabitha rose early, eager to get the children's lessons completed before the worst of the afternoon heat. She found Billy and Emma already at breakfast, supervised by Mrs. Garcia. "Where's Mr. Blackburn?" she asked, noticing his absence. "Rode out before dawn with some of the men," Mrs. Garcia replied. "Something about strays in the north pasture, said not to hold dinner for him." Tabitha felt a pang of disappointment which she quickly suppressed. Their conversation last night didn't change the fact that Russell Blackburn was the ranch foreman with duties to attend to, not a social companion. The morning's lessons went well, with both children showing improved concentration. After lunch, Tabitha suggested they move to the shade of the big oak tree near the house for their history lesson. "Today we're going to talk about the original inhabitants of this land," she said as they settled on a blanket beneath the spreading branches. "The people who were here long before any European settlers arrived." "Indians?" Billy asked eagerly. "Native Americans, yes," Tabitha corrected gently. "Though each tribe has its own name and culture. In this part of Texas, the Comanche were the predominant tribe." "Mr. Blackburn says the Comanche were the finest horsemen who ever lived," Emma chimed in. "Better than any cowboy." "He would know," a voice drawled from behind them. Tabitha turned to see a tall, lean man with a weathered face leaning against the tree trunk. She hadn't heard him approach, which was disconcerting. "I don't believe we've met," she said, rising to her feet. "Tom Weaver," the man said with a slight nod. "Scout for the ranch, just got back from checking the northern boundary." His eyes, cold and assessing, moved over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "You must be the new governess." "Miss Vance," she confirmed, disliking him instantly but determined to be polite. "Are you looking for Mr. Montgomery? He's away on business." "No, madam. Looking for Blackburn." "Got news he'll want to hear. He's out with some of the men checking on strays in the north pasture," Tabitha informed him. Weaver's mouth twisted in what might have been a smile. "Is that what he told Mrs. Garcia? Interesting." "What do you mean?" "Nothing at all, madam." His tone suggested the opposite. "Just that I've been all over the North Range today, and there ain't no sign of Blackburn or any of our boys out there." "I'm sure there's a simple explanation," Tabitha said, unsettled by the insinuation. "Perhaps they went to a different area." "Perhaps," Weaver agreed, though his expression remained skeptical. "Well, when he does turn up, tell him I need to speak with him. It's urgent." With a tip of his hat that managed to be both courteous and mocking, he sauntered away. "I don't like him," Emma said once Weaver was out of earshot. "Mr. Blackburn doesn't like him either." "Why not?" Tabitha asked, curious despite herself. "Don't know. They argue sometimes. Mr. Blackburn told Uncle Silas not to hire him, but Uncle did anyway." This was interesting information, suggesting tensions within the ranch hierarchy that Tabitha hadn't been aware of. She filed it away for future consideration and turned back to their lesson, though she found it difficult to concentrate after Weaver's visit. Russell didn't return for dinner as Mrs. Garcia had predicted, nor was he back for breakfast the next morning. By midday, Tabitha was beginning to worry, though she told herself it was ridiculous. Russell Blackburn was more than capable of taking care of himself, and it wasn't unusual for ranch business to keep him away overnight. Still, Weaver's comments nagged at her. If Russell hadn't been where he said he was going, where had he gone? And why the deception? Her worry turned to genuine concern when another day passed with no sign of him or the men who had accompanied him. Even Mrs. Garcia seemed uneasy, though she tried to hide it. "It happens sometimes," the housekeeper said when Tabitha questioned her. "Ranch work isn't predictable. They could have run into any number of problem strays that led them farther than expected, a broken wagon, bad weather in the hills." "But Mr. Weaver said he'd been all over the North Range and saw no sign of them," Tabitha pointed out. Mrs. Garcia's expression darkened. "I wouldn't put much stock in what Tom Weaver says. That man has a forked tongue." On the third morning of Russell's absence, Tabitha was awakened before dawn by the sound of horses in the yard. She hurried to the window and was relieved to see Russell dismounting, followed by 3 other riders. Even from a distance and in the dim pre-dawn light, she could tell something was wrong. Russell was moving stiffly, favoring his left side. Without stopping to think about propriety, she threw on her robe over her nightgown and hurried downstairs. By the time she reached the yard, Russell was giving instructions to the other men, his voice tight with what sounded like pain. "Russell," she called, approaching cautiously. He turned, surprise flickering across his face before he schooled his expression. "Miss Vance, it's early to be up." "I heard the horses," she explained, then gasped as she came close enough to see him clearly. A livid bruise darkened one side of his face and there was dried blood on his shirt. "You're hurt." "It's nothing," he dismissed, though he winced as he shifted his weight. "Just a disagreement that got out of hand." "A disagreement with whom?" His eyes met hers, then slid away. "Doesn't matter, it's handled." "Clearly not if this is the result," she retorted, forgetting in her concern that she was standing in the yard in her nightclothes, arguing with a man she was supposed to be civilizing. "You need medical attention." "What I need is sleep," he countered. "After I report to Montgomery." "Mr. Montgomery isn't here," she reminded him. "Then it'll wait till he gets back." Russell started toward the bunkhouse, his gait uneven. "At least let Mrs. Garcia look at those injuries," Tabitha pleaded, following him. "She has some medical knowledge, doesn't she?" He stopped, turned back to face her. In the growing light, she could see the exhaustion etched in his features, the pain he was trying to hide. "Why do you care, Miss Vance?" he asked quietly. The question caught her off guard. Why did she care? Because despite his gruffness, his rudeness, his deliberate attempts to keep everyone at a distance, she'd glimpsed something in Russell Blackburn that touched her heart, a complexity, a depth of feeling, a fundamental decency beneath the rough exterior. "Because you're a good man who's trying to do right by those children," she said finally. "And because you're hurt and it's the decent thing to do." He studied her for a long moment, then sighed. "Fine, but not Mrs. Garcia. She'll fuss and I'm in no mood for it." "Then let me help you," she offered impulsively. "I have some experience with basic first aid." Russell raised an eyebrow, wincing as the movement pulled at his bruised face. "Do you now?" "I volunteered at a hospital during the war," she explained. "I know how to clean and bandage wounds, at least." He considered this, then gave a curt nod. "All right, but not here in the open. Meet me at the house in 10 minutes. I need to give the men their instructions first." True to his word, Russell appeared at the back door of the main house precisely 10 minutes later. He'd removed his trail dusty coat and hat, but otherwise looked as battered as before. Tabitha, who had used the time to dress and gather medical supplies from the kitchen, led him to the small sitting room off the main parlor. "Sit," she instructed, pointing to a straight-backed chair. "And tell me where you're hurt." "Ribs, mostly," he admitted as he lowered himself carefully onto the chair. "Took a few hits to the face, too, as you can see." "What happened?" she asked, dampening a cloth to clean the cut on his cheekbone. Russell hesitated, then seemed to come to a decision. We've had trouble with rustlers along the northern boundary. Small operations, but persistent. Montgomery wanted to hire more men, bring in guns. I thought that was asking for a range war. Suggested I try a different approach first. What approach? Tabitha asked, gently wiping dried blood from his face. Up close, his injuries looked even worse: a split lip, the cut on his cheekbone, and bruising along his jaw. Talking to the man I suspected was behind it, Russell said, wincing slightly as she worked. Jasper Hollies. Runs a small spread north of here. Used to be bigger before the war, but he lost land to Montgomery in a bad deal. And the talking didn't go well, I take it? She asked dryly. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, then faded as it pulled at the cut. Not exactly. Hollies wasn't interested in reason. Said Montgomery had cheated him and he was just taking back what was his. So how did you end up looking like this? Hollies had friends. They jumped us as we were leaving. We handled it, but not before they got in some good hits. He shifted uncomfortably. That's the simplified version anyway. Tabitha finished cleaning his face and moved on to checking his ribs. I need to see the extent of the damage, she said, trying to sound professionally detached. Could you remove your shirt? Russell gave her a long look, then complied, unbuttoning the stained shirt with careful movements. Tabitha gasped involuntarily when she saw the bruising that spread across his left side, a mottled palette of purple and black against tan skin. That bad? He asked, watching her reaction. It looks painful, she said, regaining her composure. I don't think anything's broken, but you should be more careful. These men could have killed you. Wouldn't be the first time someone tried, he replied with grim humor. Won't be the last. Tabitha began applying a salve of arnica and witch hazel to the bruised ribs, trying to be gentle despite the firmness needed to spread the medication. Russell sat still under her ministrations, his breathing carefully controlled. You didn't tell Montgomery what you were planning, did you? She asked after a while. No, he would have forbidden it, wanted a show of force instead. And is that so wrong? If these men are stealing cattle, it's more complicated than that, Russell interrupted. Hollies believes with some justification that Montgomery acquired his land through questionable means. Using force would only escalate the situation, possibly lead to bloodshed. So you risked yourself instead, Tabitha observed, winding a bandage around his ribs to provide support. That was either very brave or very foolish. Bit of both, probably, he admitted. But I've seen what happens when men start shooting over land and cattle. No one wins. She tied off the bandage and stepped back to assess her work. There. That should help with the pain, though you should take it easy for a few days. Russell gave a short laugh as he carefully pulled his shirt back on. Not much chance of that. Ranch doesn't run itself. Surely the other men can manage for a day or two while you recover. They could, he agreed, buttoning his shirt, but it wouldn't look right. A foreman needs to be seen working, especially after something like this. Shows strength. Tabitha frowned. That's ridiculous. Pushing yourself to the point of collapse doesn't show strength, it shows stubbornness. Maybe, Russell conceded, standing gingerly, but it's the way things are out here. He paused, looking down at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Thank you for this, Tabitha. I appreciate it. The use of her given name, combined with the sincerity in his voice, sent a warm flutter through her chest. You're welcome, Russell. For a moment they stood looking at each other, something unspoken passing between them. Then Russell cleared his throat and turned toward the door. I should get to work, he said. The men will be waiting for instructions. At least have some breakfast first, Tabitha urged. You must be hungry after 3 days away. He hesitated, then nodded. All right, breakfast would be welcome. As they moved toward the kitchen, Tabitha was acutely aware of his presence beside her, of the subtle shift in their relationship that had occurred during these quiet moments of care. Russell Blackburn might still be the meanest cowboy in Texas to most people, but to her, he was becoming something else entirely, a man of principle, of complexity, of unexpected gentleness beneath the hardened exterior. And that realization was both thrilling and terrifying. News of the confrontation with Jasper Hollies spread quickly through the ranch. By midday, Tabitha had heard multiple versions of the story from the children, Mrs. Garcia, and even Charlie, who stopped by the schoolroom ostensibly to fix a loose window but really to share the latest gossip. "They say Mr. Blackburn faced down 6 armed men with nothing but his bare hands," the young man reported enthusiastically. "Knocked 2 of them cold before they knew what hit them, and sent the rest running for the hills." "I'm sure that's a slight exaggeration," Tabitha said dryly, thinking of Russell's battered condition. "Maybe," Charlie conceded, "but everyone's talking about how he settled the rustling problem without firing a shot. Old man Hollies has agreed to stop his men taking Montgomery cattle, and in exchange, Mr. Blackburn is going to speak to Montgomery about returning the water rights to Hollies's north pasture." This was news to Tabitha. He negotiated a compromise. Russell didn't mention that part. Charlie grinned. "That's Mr. Blackburn for you. Does the important work, doesn't brag about it." The children were full of questions about the incident, which made conducting lessons challenging. Tabitha finally gave up on grammar and shifted to a discussion of conflict resolution, using Russell's approach as an example. "Mr. Blackburn could have gone in with guns blazing," she explained, "but instead he chose to talk first, to understand the other person's grievance. That's often the wiser path, even if it's not always successful." "But he still got hurt," Billy pointed out. "Yes, and that's an important lesson too. Sometimes doing the right thing comes with a cost. The question we have to ask ourselves is whether the outcome is worth the price we might have to pay." "Is that why you came to Texas?" Emma asked suddenly. "Because it was the right thing, even though it was hard to leave Boston." The question caught Tabitha off guard. She'd never discussed her reasons for leaving Boston with the children, beyond saying she wanted a change of scenery. "In a way," she admitted after a moment. "Sometimes we need to leave familiar places to find where we truly belong." "And do you belong here?" Emma persisted. Tabitha looked at the 2 children watching her intently, thinking of the ranch with its vast skies and endless horizons, of Mrs. Garcia's warmth and wisdom, of Russell's complex, compelling presence. "I'm beginning to think I might," she said softly. That evening, Russell did not appear for dinner. Mrs. Garcia reported that he was taking his meal in the bunkhouse with the men, discussing plans for increased patrols along the northern boundary. Tabitha tried not to feel disappointed, telling herself it was foolish to have expected anything different. Their moment of connection that morning didn't change the fact that Russell had responsibilities that took precedence over social niceties. After putting the children to bed, she found herself once again on the porch, drawn by the cooling night air and the spectacular display of stars. The ranch was quieter than usual, with most of the hands turning in early after the excitement of the past few days. In the distance, a coyote called, the sound lonely and haunting in the vast darkness. The creak of a floorboard alerted her to another presence. She turned to see Russell standing at the corner of the porch, watching her. "I didn't mean to disturb you," he said when she noticed him. "You didn't," she assured him, gesturing to the empty chair beside her. "Join me if you'd like." He moved forward, lowering himself carefully into the chair. His movements were still stiff, but he seemed less pained than he had that morning. "How are your ribs?" she asked. "Better, thanks to your ministrations." He settled back, stretching his long legs out before him. The salve helped. What was in it? Arnica and witch hazel mostly. Mrs. Garcia provided it, I just applied it. They sat in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the distant calls of night creatures and the soft creaking of the porch swing where Tabitha sat. "I heard you negotiated a compromise with Mr. Hollies," she said eventually. "Charlie mentioned something about water rights." Russell glanced at her, then back at the star-strewn sky. "Hollies has a legitimate grievance. Montgomery bought his land when Hollies was desperate after the war, paid well below its value. Then he diverted the creek that watered Hollies's remaining pasture. It wasn't illegal, but it wasn't right either. And you think Montgomery will agree to restore the water rights? He will if he wants the rustling to stop permanently." Russell's voice held a note of steel. "I made it clear to Hollies that any further cattle theft would be dealt with harshly, but I also promised to advocate for his water rights. It's a fair solution that benefits everyone in the long run." "That's remarkably diplomatic for someone with your reputation," Tabitha observed. He looked at her then, a hint of amusement in his eyes despite the bruising that still marked his face. "You mean for the meanest cowboy in Texas?" She felt her cheeks warm. "I didn't say that. You didn't have to. It's what Montgomery calls me to anyone who'll listen." He shrugged, wincing slightly at the movement. "It's a useful reputation in some ways. Makes people think twice before crossing me." "But it's not who you really are," Tabitha said, the words more statement than question. Russell was silent for a long moment, his gaze returning to the stars. "Parts of it are true enough," he said finally. "I've done things I'm not proud of, been harder than I needed to be at times. But no, it's not the whole truth." "What is the whole truth, then?" she asked softly. He looked at her again, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "Why do you want to know, Tabitha? Is this part of your mission to civilize me?" The question stung, partly because there was truth in it. "Perhaps at first," she admitted. "But now I just want to understand you." "Why? Because I—" She hesitated, unsure how to express the confused tangle of feelings she'd developed for this complex, contradictory man. "Because I care about what happens to you, to the children, to this place." Russell studied her face, as if searching for deception and finding none. "The whole truth," he said slowly, "is that I learned early that the world is a hard place that favors the strong and crushes the weak. I decided to be strong, whatever it took, but strength without purpose is just brutality. I've spent the last few years trying to find the right balance, being tough enough to survive in this country but not so hard that I lose sight of what matters." "And what matters to you?" Tabitha asked, drawn into his rare moment of openness. "Justice. Loyalty. Keeping my word." He paused, then added more quietly, "Protecting those who need it. Like Emma and Billy." "Like Emma and Billy," he agreed. "They deserve better than to be pawns in Montgomery's social climbing." "You truly care for them," Tabitha observed. "They're the closest thing to family I've got," Russell admitted. "Watching them grow, teaching them, seeing them heal from their losses. It's given me a purpose I didn't know I was looking for." The raw honesty in his voice moved her deeply. This was the real Russell Blackburn, not the fearsome foreman who terrorized ranch hands and intimidated visitors, but a man of profound feeling who had found meaning in caring for two orphan children. "They love you too," she said softly. "Anyone can see that." "They need stability," he replied, his voice roughening. "A home where they're valued for who they are, not what they represent. That's why I can't let Montgomery send them away." "We won't let that happen," Tabitha said firmly, reaching out impulsively to touch his hand where it rested on the arm of his chair. "I promise you that." Russell looked down at her hand on his, then slowly turned his palm upward, engulfing her smaller hand in his calloused grip. "Thank you," he said simply. They sat like that for a long moment, hands joined, a tangible connection forming between them. Tabitha was acutely aware of the warmth of his skin against hers, the gentleness of his touch despite the strength she knew those hands possessed. Finally, reluctantly, Russell released her hand and stood. "It's late," he said, his voice gruff again. "You should get some rest." Tabitha rose as well, suddenly shy in his presence. "Yes, I suppose I should." He walked her to the door, maintaining a respectful distance now. At the threshold, he paused, looking down at her with an expression that made her heart beat faster. "Good night, Tabitha," he said, his deep voice caressing her name. "Good night, Russell," she replied softly. As she climbed the stairs to her room, Tabitha knew with sudden clarity that she was falling in love with Russell Blackburn, the meanest cowboy in Texas, who wasn't so mean after all. The realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. Exhilarating, because of the depth of feeling he stirred in her. Terrifying, because she had no idea if he could ever return those feelings. For all his moments of openness, Russell remained a man accustomed to guarding his emotions, to keeping others at a distance. And she was still, in many ways, an outsider, a Boston schoolteacher temporarily transplanted to the Texas frontier. But as she prepared for bed, Tabitha found herself hoping, for the first time, that her position at the Montgomery Ranch might become more than temporary. That she might find a permanent place here, under these vast Texas skies, alongside a man who was so much more than his fearsome reputation suggested. The next morning brought an unexpected development: the return of Silas Montgomery, a full week ahead of schedule. Tabitha was in the schoolroom with the children when she heard the commotion of his arrival. Through the window, she saw him dismount from his horse, his face set in grim lines as he snapped orders at the stable boy. "Is Uncle Silas angry?" Emma asked, peering around Tabitha to see out the window. "I'm not sure," Tabitha replied, though Montgomery's body language certainly suggested agitation. "Let's continue with our lesson. I'm sure if there's anything important, your uncle will let us know." But concentration was impossible after that. Even Billy, usually able to focus on subjects that interested him, kept glancing nervously at the door. After 30 minutes of diminishing returns, Tabitha decided to end formal lessons for the morning. "Why don't we go outside for some natural science observation?" she suggested, closing her book. "The butterfly chrysalises we've been monitoring should be ready to emerge soon." The children eagerly agreed, clearly relieved to escape the tense atmosphere of the house. As they gathered their specimen jars and notebooks, Tabitha heard raised voices from Montgomery's study. Though she couldn't make out the words, the tone was unmistakably angry, and one of the voices belonged to Russell. "They're arguing again," Emma whispered, her face troubled. "It's nothing for you to worry about," Tabitha assured her, though she felt a twist of anxiety herself. Adult disagreements happen sometimes. "Now, let's see about those butterflies." They spent the next hour in the garden, successfully witnessing the emergence of 2 monarch butterflies from their chrysalises, an event that temporarily distracted the children from the tension in the house. Tabitha was explaining the butterflies' migration patterns when she noticed Russell striding across the yard toward the stables, his face dark with anger. "Miss Vance," he called, altering his course to approach them. "A word, please." "Of course," she replied, heart sinking at his expression. "Children, continue your observations. I'll be right back." She moved a few paces away with Russell, keeping the children in sight but out of earshot. "What's wrong?" she asked quietly. "Montgomery's back, as you've no doubt noticed," Russell said grimly. "He's received a letter from the headmaster of that school in San Antonio. They've agreed to take Emma and Billy at the start of next month." "Next month?" Tabitha exclaimed. "But that's barely 4 weeks away. I thought he was considering waiting until next year." "He was," Russell confirmed, "until you and I started advocating for the children to stay here. Now he's determined to send them away as soon as possible. Says they're becoming too attached to the wrong influences." "Meaning you," Tabitha said, understanding dawning. "And you," Russell added, meeting her gaze directly. "He doesn't appreciate your support of my position." Tabitha felt a cold knot of dread form in her stomach. "Is he dismissing me?" "Not yet," Russell said. "But he made it clear your continued employment depends on your cooperation with his plans for the children." "I see," she said quietly, glancing back at Emma and Billy, who were carefully releasing the newly emerged butterflies. The thought of them being sent away to a strict boarding school, separated from everything and everyone they loved, filled her with dismay. "What can we do?" Russell's expression softened slightly as he looked at her. "You're willing to risk your position over this?" "Of course I am," Tabitha replied without hesitation. "Those children belong here with people who truly care for them. I won't be part of tearing them away from that." Something flickered in Russell's eyes, surprise, admiration, perhaps something deeper. "Thank you," he said simply. Then his expression turned thoughtful. "There might be a way. Montgomery's not their legal guardian, you know. He's not." This was news to Tabitha. "But I thought he's been acting as guardian, but the legal paperwork was never completed after their mother died. He was supposed to file with the court in San Antonio, but he's been putting it off." Russell lowered his voice further. "Their fathers will named me as guardian if both parents died, with Montgomery as an alternative if I was unavailable." Montgomery conveniently forgot to mention that when he brought the children here. "So legally, you have a stronger claim to guardianship than he does. If I can prove the contents of the will, yes. Problem is, Montgomery has the document, and he's not likely to produce it voluntarily." Tabitha's mind raced. There must be a copy somewhere, perhaps with the lawyer who drew it up, James Forrester, in San Antonio, Russell confirmed. "But I can't leave the ranch right now, not with this rustling situation still unsettled." "I could go," Tabitha offered impulsively. "I could take the stage to San Antonio tomorrow, speak with Mr. Forrester, and be back within 3 days. Russell stared at her, clearly taken aback by the suggestion. "You do that?" "I would," she said firmly. "For the children, and—" She hesitated, then added more softly, "for you." Their eyes met, and something powerful passed between them, an acknowledgment of the bond that had formed, of the feelings neither had yet dared to name. After a long moment, Russell nodded. "All right, but not alone. It's a hard journey, and San Antonio can be dangerous for a woman traveling by herself." He thought for a moment. "Charlie can accompany you. He's young but reliable, and Montgomery won't question his absence as much as mine." "What will we tell Mr. Montgomery about my sudden departure?" "The truth, partly," Russell said. "That you need to purchase additional books and supplies for the children's education. He'll approve of anything that makes them more presentable for that fancy school. And when we return with a copy of the will," Russell's expression hardened, "then we'll confront him with legal representation if necessary. Montgomery cares about his reputation above all else. He won't risk a public legal battle he might lose." The plan was risky, but Tabitha couldn't see an alternative. "Very well, I'll speak to Mrs. Garcia about preparing for the journey." Russell caught her arm gently as she turned to go. "Tabitha," he said, his voice low and intense, "thank you for this. I know it's asking a lot." "It's the right thing to do," she replied simply. Then, feeling suddenly bold, she added, "Besides, I find I'm quite invested in staying here at the ranch, for various reasons." A slow smile spread across Russell's face, transforming his features despite the fading bruises. Is that so? It is, she confirmed, feeling her cheeks warm under his gaze. Well then, he said, releasing her arm but maintaining eye contact, I suppose we both have a stake in how this turns out. With that cryptic remark, he nodded toward the children and strode away toward the stables, leaving Tabitha to wonder exactly what he'd meant, and to hope it signified what she thought it might. That evening, she informed Montgomery of her plan to travel to San Antonio for educational supplies. To her relief, he not only approved but seemed pleased with her initiative. "Excellent idea, Miss Vance," he said, stroking his mustache thoughtfully. "The children should be well equipped when they begin at St. Mary's Academy. While you're there, perhaps you could call on Headmaster Phillips. I've written ahead to inform him of your role in preparing Emma and Billy for enrollment." "Of course," Tabitha agreed smoothly, though the thought made her stomach churn. "I'd be happy to meet with him." "Good, good." Montgomery reached into his desk drawer and withdrew a small pouch that clinked with coins. "For your expenses, and a little extra for anything you might need personally. San Antonio has some fine shops." "That's very generous, Mr. Montgomery," Tabitha said, accepting the money with a pang of guilt at her deception. "Not at all. You've done well with the children despite some questionable influences." His expression cooled slightly. "I trust you now understand my concerns about their becoming too attached to the ranch and its people." "I understand your position," Tabitha replied carefully, "though I still believe the children benefit from stability and familiar surroundings." Montgomery waved a dismissive hand. "Children are adaptable. Emma and Billy will thrive at St. Mary's once they adjust. The important thing is their future prospects." He fixed her with a direct look. "I'm counting on your support in this transition, Miss Vance. Their education at the ranch was always intended to be temporary." "As was my position here, I presume?" Tabitha couldn't help asking. "Not necessarily," Montgomery said, surprising her. "There could be a place for you in San Antonio if you wish it. The children will need a familiar face during their adjustment period." This was unexpected, an offer to continue her employment beyond the ranch. A month ago, Tabitha might have been tempted. Now, the thought of leaving Texas for a city position held no appeal whatsoever. "That's very kind," she said noncommittally. "I'll certainly consider it." "Do that," Montgomery said with a nod of dismissal. "The stage leaves at 8 tomorrow. Charlie will accompany you, as Blackburn suggested. A sensible precaution." So he knew of the arrangement with Charlie. Tabitha wondered what else Montgomery knew or suspected about her plans. The journey to San Antonio was long and uncomfortable, the stagecoach lurching over rutted roads beneath the merciless Texas sun. Charlie proved to be an attentive escort, ensuring Tabitha had water and shade at each stop, and keeping up a steady stream of cheerful conversation to pass the time. They reached the city late on the second day, checking into a modest hotel near the center of town. San Antonio was larger and more developed than Tabitha had expected, with substantial stone buildings, busy streets, and a surprising mix of cultures, American, Mexican, and German influences visible in the architecture, and heard in the languages being spoken around them. "We should find Mr. Forrester's office first thing in the morning," Tabitha told Charlie as they ate a simple dinner in the hotel dining room. "The sooner we can get the information we need, the sooner we can return to the ranch." Charlie nodded, though he looked a bit disappointed. "Thought you might want to see some of the city first. San Antonio's got interesting history, the Alamo and all that." "Perhaps if we have time afterward," Tabitha conceded, touched by his enthusiasm. "But our primary mission takes precedence." The next morning, they made their way to the law offices of Forrester and Wells, located in a handsome brick building on one of San Antonio's main streets. Tabitha had dressed carefully in her best traveling suit, hoping to make a favorable impression. James Forrester proved to be a dignified gentleman in his 60s, with silver hair and penetrating dark eyes that missed nothing. He listened attentively as Tabitha explained her position at the Montgomery Ranch and her concern for the children's welfare. "So you see, Mr. Forrester," she concluded, "we believe the children's fathers will name Mr. Blackburn as their guardian, but Mr. Montgomery has possession of the document and seems reluctant to acknowledge its provisions." Forrester steepled his fingers, regarding her thoughtfully. "Miss Vance, while I sympathize with your concerns, I must point out that I cannot simply disclose the contents of a client's will to anyone who asks. That would be a breach of professional ethics." Tabitha's heart sank. "I understand, but however," Forrester continued, "I can confirm or deny information that is already known to you. For instance, if you were to ask whether Captain Thomas Wallace did indeed name Russell Blackburn as guardian for his children in the event of both parents' deaths, I could answer that question." Tabitha exchanged a quick glance with Charlie, hope rising again. "Did Captain Wallace name Russell Blackburn as guardian for his children?" she asked directly. "He did," Forrester confirmed, with Silas Montgomery designated as an alternative guardian only if Mr. Blackburn was unable or unwilling to serve in that capacity. "And is there a copy of the will that Mr. Blackburn could obtain?" Charlie asked eagerly. "The original is in Mr. Montgomery's possession as executor of the estate," Forrester replied. "But yes, there is a copy in my files. And while I cannot give you that copy without proper legal authorization, I can tell you that if Mr. Blackburn were to petition the court for guardianship, citing the provisions of the will, I would be obligated to produce the copy as evidence." Tabitha felt a surge of relief. "So if Mr. Blackburn comes to San Antonio and files a petition with the court, he would have a strong legal claim," Forrester confirmed. "Captain Wallace was quite explicit about his wishes. He and Mr. Blackburn served together during the war and formed a deep bond of trust. The captain believed Mr. Blackburn would provide the kind of upbringing he wanted for his children, practical, honorable, and connected to the land. That's exactly what Mr. Blackburn wants for them," Tabitha said earnestly. "He cares deeply for Emma and Billy. He's been teaching them ranching skills, but he also values their education. He just doesn't want them sent away to boarding school when they're still recovering from the loss of their parents." Forrester studied her with those penetrating eyes. "You seem quite invested in this matter, Miss Vance. May I ask why? Beyond your professional concern as their governess." Tabitha hesitated, unsure how to answer. How could she explain the complex emotions that had led her to undertake this journey? Her growing love for the children, her belief in their need for stability, her deepening feelings for Russell, all were factors, but none fully captured her motivation. "Because it's right," she said finally. "Emma and Billy deserve to grow up in a home where they're truly loved for who they are, not what they represent. And Mr. Blackburn, for all his rough edges, loves those children as if they were his own. He would give his life for them without hesitation." Forrester nodded slowly. "I believe you. And I think Captain Wallace would approve of your advocacy." He reached for a sheet of paper and began writing. "I cannot give you the copy of the will, but I can provide a letter confirming its existence and general provisions. Mr. Blackburn can use this to initiate legal proceedings if necessary." "Thank you," Tabitha said fervently. "This will make all the difference." As they left the law office, letter safely tucked into Tabitha's reticule, Charlie grinned at her. "That went better than expected. Should we celebrate by seeing a bit of San Antonio before we head back?" Tabitha was tempted. The journey had been exhausting, and the thought of immediately boarding another stagecoach for the return trip was daunting. Besides, she had promised to purchase educational supplies to maintain their cover story. "A few hours," she agreed. "We can visit some bookshops for the supplies I promised Mr. Montgomery, perhaps see the Alamo briefly, and then catch the afternoon stage back." They spent a pleasant few hours exploring the city. Charlie proved to be a knowledgeable guide, having visited San Antonio several times before. They purchased books, paper, and other educational materials, visited the historic Alamo site, and even had time for a proper sit-down lunch before heading to the stagecoach station. The return journey seemed even longer than the outbound trip, Tabitha's mind racing with plans and concerns. How would Montgomery react when confronted with the truth about the guardianship? Would he fight Russell's claim? And what would this mean for her position at the ranch? By the time they arrived back at Montgomery Ranch, Tabitha was exhausted but determined. Charlie helped her down from the stage, handling their bags and purchases with care. "Should I take these to the house, Miss Vance?" he asked, nodding toward the parcels of books and supplies. "Yes, please," she replied. "And Charlie, thank you for your help. I couldn't have done this without you." He ducked his head, embarrassed by her gratitude. "Just doing what Mr. Blackburn asked, miss. He's a good man even if he doesn't always show it." "Yes," Tabitha agreed softly. "I believe he is." As Charlie headed toward the house with their purchases, Tabitha made her way to the stables, guessing that Russell would be there at this time of day. She found him in the tack room, mending a bridle with the same careful attention he gave to all his work. He looked up as she entered, his expression immediately alert. "You're back. How did it go?" Tabitha closed the door behind her, ensuring their privacy. "We were successful. Mr. Forrester confirmed that Captain Wallace named you as guardian for Emma and Billy. He couldn't give us a copy of the will without proper legal authorization, but he provided a letter confirming its contents." She withdrew the letter from her reticule and handed it to him. "He said you can use this to petition the court for guardianship if necessary." Russell read the letter slowly, his expression unreadable. When he looked up, there was a fierce light in his eyes that took Tabitha's breath away. "This changes everything," he said quietly. "With this, I can fight for them legally, not just morally." "Mr. Forrester seemed to think you would have a strong case," Tabitha confirmed. "He said Captain Wallace was quite explicit about his wishes." Russell carefully folded the letter and tucked it into his shirt pocket next to his heart. Thomas knew what he wanted for his children. A life connected to the land, to honest work, to values that matter. He looked directly at Tabitha. Not some fancy school where they'd learn to be ashamed of who they are and where they come from. "What will you do now?" she asked. "Confront Montgomery?" "Not yet," Russell said thoughtfully. "First, I need to speak with Judge Wilson in town. He's a fair man, respected in the county. If he supports my petition, Montgomery will have a harder time fighting it." "And the children? Should we tell them what's happening?" Russell considered this. "Not the details, not yet, but perhaps. Perhaps we should prepare them for the possibility of change. Let them know that whatever happens, they won't be separated from the people who care about them." Tabitha nodded, relief washing over her. "I think that's wise." They've been anxious since Montgomery's return, sensing the tension but not understanding it. Russell studied her face, noting the signs of fatigue from the journey. "You look tired," he said, his voice softening. "You should rest." "I'm fine," she assured him, though in truth she was exhausted. "There's too much to do." "The rest can wait until tomorrow," Russell insisted gently. "You've done more than anyone could have expected, Tabitha. Taking this journey, securing this evidence, I won't forget it." The intensity in his voice, the way he said her name, sent a flutter through her chest. "I did it for the children," she said softly. "And for you." Russell took a step closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "Why?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why would you risk so much for me?" Tabitha met his gaze steadily, finding courage she hadn't known she possessed. "Because I care about you, Russell. More than I should, perhaps, but I can't seem to help it." For a moment he stood perfectly still, his blue eyes searching hers. Then, with aching gentleness, he raised a hand to her cheek, his calloused palm warm against her skin. "Tabitha," he said, her name a prayer on his lips, "you deserve better than a scarred, difficult man like me." "I deserve to choose for myself," she countered, leaning slightly into his touch. "And I choose you, difficult as you may be." A smile, rare and transformative, spread across his face. "Then you're either very brave or very foolish." "Perhaps both," she replied, smiling back. The moment hung between them, charged with possibility. Tabitha thought he might kiss her then, but instead Russell lowered his hand reluctantly. "Not here," he said, regret in his voice. "Not like this. You deserve better than a stolen moment in a tack room." Tabitha understood. Russell Blackburn was a man of honor despite his rough reputation. He wouldn't rush this, wouldn't treat her with anything less than complete respect. "I should go to the house," she said, though leaving was the last thing she wanted to do. "Montgomery will be expecting a report on my trip to San Antonio." Russell nodded. "Be careful what you say. Don't give him any reason to suspect our true purpose." "I won't," she promised. "What about you? When will you go to see Judge Wilson?" "Tomorrow," he decided. "The sooner we set this in motion, the better. Montgomery's been making arrangements for the children's departure. We need to act before he can send them away." With that understanding, they parted, Tabitha heading toward the main house while Russell returned to his work. But something fundamental had shifted between them, a mutual acknowledgement of feelings too powerful to ignore. A shared commitment to fight for the family they both cherished. As Tabitha approached the house, she saw Montgomery waiting on the porch, watching her with narrowed eyes. She wondered how long he'd been there, whether he'd seen her emerge from the stables, whether he suspected the true purpose of her journey. Taking a deep breath, she straightened her shoulders and climbed the porch steps, ready to play her part in the deception a little longer. Soon, very soon, the truth would come out. And when it did, she would stand firmly beside Russell, whatever the consequences might be. Montgomery was waiting for her in the parlor, a glass of whiskey in his hand and a look of calculation on his face. As Tabitha entered, he gestured for her to take a seat. "Welcome back, Miss Vance," he said, his tone deceptively pleasant. "I trust your journey was productive." "Very," Tabitha replied with practiced calm. "I purchased several excellent books on history and mathematics, some quality paper and pencils, and maps of both Texas and the United States. Charlie is bringing everything in now." "Splendid," Montgomery said, though his eyes remained cold. "And did you call on Headmaster Phillips as I suggested?" Tabitha had prepared for this question. "I did, but unfortunately he was away at a conference in Austin. His secretary was most helpful, however, providing information about the school's curriculum and requirements." Montgomery nodded slowly, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "A pity you missed him. Phillips is an excellent educator. The children will benefit greatly from his methods." He paused, then added casually, "I saw you coming from the stables just now, checking on your horse." So he had been watching. Tabitha maintained her composure with effort. "I was thanking Charlie for his assistance during the journey. He was most helpful." "Indeed. Charlie mentioned that you made an additional stop at a law office while in San Antonio." Montgomery's gaze sharpened. "Any particular reason for that?" Tabitha's heart lurched, but she kept her expression neutral. Charlie must have been questioned upon their arrival while she was still speaking with Russell. Yes, actually, I was inquiring about having my teaching credentials formally recognized in Texas. If I'm to continue in education here, I thought it prudent to understand the legal requirements. It was a plausible explanation, and one that Montgomery couldn't easily disprove. He studied her face for a long moment, clearly searching for signs of deception. "A sensible precaution," he said finally, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. "Though perhaps premature, given the temporary nature of your position here." "One should always plan for the future, Mr. Montgomery," Tabitha replied evenly. "Even uncertain futures." He smiled thinly at that. "Quite so." Setting down his glass, he rose from his chair. "Well, I won't keep you from your rest after your journey. We can discuss the new educational materials tomorrow. The children will be pleased to see you. They've been quite despondent in your absence." "I've missed them too," Tabitha said honestly. "Good night, Mr. Montgomery." She escaped to her room with relief, certain that Montgomery suspected something but equally certain he couldn't prove it. For now, that would have to be enough. The next morning, Russell rode into town at first light to meet with Judge Wilson. Tabitha kept the children occupied with their regular lessons, though her mind was elsewhere, wondering how the meeting was progressing and what would happen when Russell returned. Her answer came shortly after midday, when the sound of approaching horses drew her and the children to the schoolroom window. Russell was returning, accompanied by an older man in a formal black coat whom Tabitha guessed must be Judge Wilson. A third rider, younger and carrying what looked like a leather document case, followed behind them. "Who's that with Mr. Blackburn?" Emma asked, pressing her face to the glass. "I'm not sure," Tabitha replied, though she had her suspicions. "Let's continue with our lesson, shall we?" But concentration was impossible now. Even Tabitha found her attention wandering as she listened for sounds from downstairs. Eventually, she heard Montgomery's voice raised in anger, followed by the deeper tones of Russell and another man, presumably Judge Wilson. "Miss Vance, Mrs." Garcia called from the doorway, her expression grave. "Your presence is requested in the study. The children are to remain here." "What's happening?" Billy demanded as Tabitha rose to comply. "Is Uncle Silas mad again?" "Everything will be fine," Tabitha assured him, hoping it was true. "Continue with your reading while I'm gone. I'll be back soon." The atmosphere in Montgomery's study was tense enough to cut with a knife. Montgomery stood behind his desk, his face flushed with anger. Russell stood opposite him, his stance relaxed but alert, like a gunfighter ready to draw. Between them sat Judge Wilson, a dignified man with iron gray hair and a calmly authoritative manner. The young man with the document case sat slightly apart, pen poised over paper, a court clerk, Tabitha realized, recording the proceedings. "Ah, Miss Vance," Montgomery said as she entered, his voice brittle with suppressed rage. "How convenient. Perhaps you'd care to explain your role in this underhanded scheme." Before Tabitha could respond, Judge Wilson raised a hand. "Let's maintain civility, Mr. Montgomery." "Miss Vance, please take a seat. We're discussing a matter of legal guardianship for the minor children, Emma and William Wallace." Tabitha sat in the indicated chair, glancing at Russell, who gave her a slight nod of reassurance. "As I was explaining," the judge continued, "the will of Captain Thomas Wallace is quite clear. He named Russell Blackburn as guardian for his children in the event of both parents' deaths, with Silas Montgomery as alternate guardian only if Mr. Blackburn was unable or unwilling to serve." "A will that was never properly executed," Montgomery snapped. "The document wasn't filed with the court after my sister's death." An oversight that we're correcting now, Judge Wilson replied mildly. The will's validity isn't in question, Mr. Montgomery. Mr. Forrester has provided a certified copy, and his letter confirms that Captain Wallace was of sound mind when he made his wishes known. This is absurd, Montgomery fumed. Blackburn is a ranch foreman, not a suitable guardian for children of good family. He has no education, no social standing, no financial interest in the children's inheritance, Russell interrupted, his voice dangerously quiet. Is that what concerns you, Montgomery? That you'll lose control of Thomas's land and investments if I become their guardian? Montgomery's face reddened further. How dare you imply? It's not an implication, Russell cut in. It's the truth. You've been using the children's inheritance to expand your own holdings, thinking no one would challenge you, but Thomas was smarter than that. He knew exactly what kind of man you are, Judge Wilson, Tabitha interjected, hoping to diffuse the tension. Perhaps we should focus on what's best for Emma and Billy. They've been through a tremendous loss, and what they need now is stability and love. The judge nodded. Well said, Miss Vance. That is indeed the court's primary concern in matters of guardianship. He turned to Montgomery. Mr. Montgomery, I understand you've made arrangements to send the children to boarding school in San Antonio. St. Mary's Academy is one of the finest educational institutions in Texas, Montgomery replied stiffly. They would receive advantages there that they cannot possibly get on a ranch. And yet, by all accounts, they are thriving here, Judge Wilson observed. Miss Vance, as their governess, what is your assessment of the children's well-being and educational progress? Tabitha took a deep breath, aware that her answer could be decisive. Emma and Billy are bright, curious children who are learning rapidly in their current environment. They excel in traditional subjects like reading and mathematics, but they're also gaining practical knowledge about ranching, nature, and self-reliance. Most importantly, they're happy here. They've formed strong attachments to the ranch and its people, particularly Mr. Blackburn. And you believe these attachments are beneficial to their development? The judge asked. Absolutely, Tabitha said firmly. After losing both parents, the children need consistent relationships with adults they trust. Mr. Blackburn has provided that stability and emotional support. He may not have formal education, but he teaches them values that no school can provide: honesty, hard work, compassion, responsibility. Montgomery made a dismissive noise. Blackburn is hardly a model of refined behavior. The man has a reputation for violence and profanity. Is that what you consider appropriate influence for impressionable children? Mr. Blackburn is exactly what those children need, Tabitha countered, anger giving her courage. A man who will put their welfare above all else, who understands their grief because he's experienced his own, who sees their potential and encourages it without trying to mold them into something they're not. She met Montgomery's gaze directly. And he loves them, Mr. Montgomery. Not for what they represent or what they might become, but for who they are right now. A heavy silence followed her impassioned defense. Russell was looking at her with an expression that made her heart race: admiration, gratitude, and something deeper, more personal. Judge Wilson cleared his throat. Well spoken, Miss Vance. Your perspective as someone who works closely with the children is valuable. He turned to the clerk. Make sure Miss Vance's testimony is recorded in full. This is outrageous, Montgomery sputtered. The governess is clearly biased. She and Blackburn have been conspiring behind my back. That's enough, Montgomery, Russell said quietly. This isn't about you or me. It's about Emma and Billy and what their father wanted for them. The judge nodded. Indeed. And having reviewed the evidence and heard testimony, I am inclined to uphold Captain Wallace's wishes. Mr. Blackburn appears to be providing appropriate care and education for the children, with Miss Vance's professional assistance. He fixed Montgomery with a stern look. Unless you can provide compelling evidence that Mr. Blackburn is unfit to serve as guardian, I will be granting his petition. Montgomery seemed to deflate, the anger draining from him to be replaced by calculation. And the financial arrangements, the children's inheritance, will be properly managed for their benefit with regular accounting to the court, Judge Wilson replied firmly. Captain Wallace's will establish a trust for that purpose, with you and Mr. Blackburn as co-trustees. That arrangement will stand. This seemed to mollify Montgomery somewhat. I see. And where will the children reside? This is my ranch, after all. I've purchased land, Russell said, surprising both Montgomery and Tabitha. The old Kendall place adjoining your north pasture, 500 acres, good water, solid house. The sale will be finalized next week. When did you? Tabitha began, astonished. Been saving for years, Russell explained, a hint of pride in his voice. Was going to tell you once it was official. Judge Wilson nodded approvingly. That resolves the matter of residence then. The children will live with Mr. Blackburn on his property, with continued access to educational resources. He turned to Tabitha. Miss Vance, would you be willing to continue as governess under these new arrangements? Tabitha felt a surge of joy so intense it nearly overwhelmed her. Yes, Your Honor, I would be most willing. Excellent. Then, unless there are further objections. The judge looked at Montgomery, who pressed his lips together but remained silent. I will issue the formal guardianship decree tomorrow. Mr. Blackburn, I'll expect you in my office at 10 o'clock to sign the necessary papers. With that, the meeting concluded. Montgomery retreated into stony silence, refusing to look at either Russell or Tabitha as Judge Wilson and his clerk gathered their materials. Russell escorted the judge out, leaving Tabitha alone with Montgomery. For a long moment neither spoke. Then Montgomery raised his head, his expression coldly composed once more. You surprise me, Miss Vance, he said at last. I thought you were a woman of ambition. I am, Tabitha replied calmly, but my ambitions have changed since coming to Texas. A humorless smile twisted his mouth. Clearly. Well, I won't stand in your way, but know this: you're choosing a difficult path. Russell Blackburn may seem romantic now, with his rough-hewn nobility and frontier mystique. But men like him don't change fundamentally. The meanness, the violence, the darkness that drives him, those things don't disappear because a woman thinks she can redeem them. Tabitha met his gaze steadily. I'm not trying to change Russell, Mr. Montgomery. I value him for exactly who he is. Perhaps that's something you might consider: accepting people for who they are, not who you wish them to be. Montgomery's expression hardened. You'll regret this decision, Miss Vance. Mark my words. I don't think I will, she replied with quiet certainty. Now, if you'll excuse me, I should return to the children. They'll be wondering what's happening. She left him there, surrounded by the trappings of his wealth and ambition, and felt nothing but relief as she climbed the stairs back to the schoolroom. A new future was taking shape, one she could scarcely have imagined when she first arrived at Montgomery Ranch. It wasn't the life she had planned, but it was the one her heart had chosen. Russell was waiting for her on the landing, his tall figure silhouetted against the window light. Without a word, he took her hand and led her into a small alcove where they wouldn't be observed. You were magnificent in there, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Standing up to Montgomery, defending me to the judge. I don't have words enough to thank you. You don't need to thank me, Tabitha replied softly. I spoke the truth, nothing more. It was more than that, and you know it. His blue eyes, usually so guarded, were open now, vulnerable in a way she'd never seen before. You've seen the worst of me, Tabitha, my temper, my harshness, my stubborn pride. And yet you still believe in me. That's a gift I never expected to receive from anyone, least of all a refined Boston lady." Tabitha smiled at that. "I'm not so refined, Russell, and Boston seems very far away now. Do you miss it?" he asked, studying her face. "Sometimes," she admitted. "I miss certain things, libraries, concerts, the changing seasons, but I don't miss who I was there. I was incomplete, though I didn't know it until I came here." Russell's hand, large and calloused, gently cupped her cheek. "And now I feel as though I've found a part of myself I never knew was missing," she said honestly. "Here with the children, with you." His expression softened, the usual stern lines of his face relaxing into something that made her heart ache with tenderness. "Tabitha Vance," he said, her name a caress on his lips. "I never thought to find someone like you in this life. Never thought a woman of your quality would look twice at a man like me." "Then you underestimated us both," she replied, covering his hand with her own. For a moment, they stood like that, connected by touch and gaze, the air between them charged with possibility. Then, with exquisite gentleness, Russell lowered his head and brushed his lips against hers, a question, an offering, a promise. Tabitha answered by rising on tiptoe, her free hand finding the back of his neck as she returned his kiss with all the feeling that had been building in her heart these past weeks. It was a perfect moment, suspended in time, tender yet passionate, a beginning rather than an ending. When they finally parted, Russell rested his forehead against hers, his breathing uneven. "I should have done that weeks ago," he murmured. "Better late than never," she teased gently. He chuckled, the sound vibrating through her. "True enough." Reluctantly, he straightened. "We should tell the children what's happening. They deserve to know they won't be sent away." "Yes," Tabitha agreed. "They'll be overjoyed." Hand in hand, they walked toward the schoolroom, ready to share the news that would change all their lives. The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. Russell officially became Emma and Billy's legal guardian, with the paperwork signed and filed in Judge Wilson's court. Montgomery, though clearly displeased, maintained a cool civility, focusing on his business interests and spending most of his time away from the ranch. The purchase of the Kendall property was finalized, and Russell began the work of preparing it for habitation. The house, solid but neglected, needed considerable repair. The ranch hands, many of whom had grown fond of Emma and Billy, volunteered their free time to help with the renovations. Tabitha divided her time between continuing the children's education and assisting with plans for the move. She found herself unexpectedly excited by the prospect of creating a proper home, something she hadn't given much thought to in her previous life as a Boston schoolteacher. The children were thrilled by the developments. The knowledge that they would stay in Texas, with Russell as their guardian and Tabitha as their teacher, brought a new security and happiness to their young faces. They threw themselves into preparations for the move, offering opinions on everything from room arrangements to where the vegetable garden should be located. "Will you live with us at the new house, Miss Vance?" Emma asked one afternoon as they sorted through books to pack. Tabitha hesitated, uncertain how to answer. She and Russell had not discussed the precise arrangements beyond her continuing as governess. "I'll be your teacher, certainly," she replied carefully, "but the details haven't been settled yet." Emma gave her a look of surprising perception for a child of 8. "But you love Mr. Blackburn, don't you? And he loves you, we can tell." Tabitha felt her cheeks warm. "Relationships between adults are complicated, Emma." "They don't have to be," the girl said matter-of-factly. "If you love someone and they love you, you should be together. That's what my mama always said." Out of the mouths of babes, Tabitha thought. Your mama was a wise woman, but there are proper ways of doing things, especially when children are involved. Emma rolled her eyes in a manner decidedly unbecoming to a young lady. Grown-ups always make things harder than they need to be. Tabitha couldn't help laughing at that. Perhaps you're right. Now, which books would you like to take to the new house? That evening she found Russell on the porch, studying architectural drawings by lamplight. He looked up as she approached, his face softening in the way it did only for her. "The children are finally asleep," she reported, taking the seat beside him. "They're so excited about the move they could hardly settle down." "Can't blame them," Russell said, setting aside the drawings. "It's a big change, a good one, I hope." "The best," Tabitha assured him. "They're thrilled to be staying with you." Though Emma did ask a rather direct question about our arrangements. Russell raised an eyebrow. "Did she now? And what did you tell her?" "That the details hadn't been settled yet." Tabitha glanced at him sideways. "Which is true, isn't it?" He took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm in a way that sent shivers up her arm. "Only because I wanted to be sure of your feelings before presuming anything." "I believe I've made my feelings quite clear, Mr. Blackburn," she said, trying for primness but failing as a smile crept onto her face. "You have it that, Miss Vance." His blue eyes held hers, serious now despite his light tone. "But there's a proper way to do things, as you've reminded me more than once during our acquaintance." With that, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box, the kind that could hold only one thing. Tabitha's breath caught as he opened it to reveal a ring with a single pearl set in gold, simple but exquisite. "It was my mother's," Russell said, his voice suddenly rough with emotion. "The only thing of hers I managed to keep through all the years of wandering. I always thought I'd never have cause to give it to anyone." He took her hand again, his touch gentle despite the strength she knew those hands possessed. "Tabitha Vance, you came to Texas to tame the meanest cowboy in the state, and instead you taught him what it means to love. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife and a mother to Emma and Billy?" Tears sprang to Tabitha's eyes, joy overwhelming her usual composure. "Yes," she whispered, then more firmly, "Yes, Russell, nothing would make me happier." He slipped the ring onto her finger, where it fit as if it had been made for her. Then he drew her to her feet and into his arms, his kiss a seal on their commitment, a promise of all that was to come. When they finally separated, both breathless, Russell rested his forehead against hers in the way she had come to love. "We'll have to wait a bit before we can marry," he said regretfully. "The house isn't ready yet, and there's much to do before winter." "I don't mind waiting a little while," Tabitha assured him. "As long as we're together, that's what matters." "Together," he repeated, the word a vow on his lips. "For always, Tabitha, that's my promise to you." As they stood there in the Texas twilight, arms around each other and hearts aligned, Tabitha reflected on the strange, wonderful journey that had brought her to this moment. She had come west expecting to civilize a brute, only to discover a man of depth and principle behind the fearsome reputation. A man who had awakened in her feelings she'd never imagined possible, who had shown her a kind of love that transcended backgrounds and expectations. Russell Blackburn might still be considered the meanest cowboy in Texas by those who didn't know him. But to Tabitha, to Emma and Billy, to the people who truly saw him, he was simply the best man they knew, honest, loyal, and capable of a love as vast as the Texas sky. The wedding took place on a clear October day, with the Texas hill country ablaze in autumn colors. They held the ceremony at the new house, which Russell had worked tirelessly to prepare. The simple white structure, set on a gentle rise overlooking a creek, had been transformed from a neglected homestead to a welcoming home, with fresh paint, repaired porches, and new curtains at the windows. Judge Wilson performed the ceremony, with Emma serving as Tabitha's maid of honor and Billy as Russell's best man. Mrs. Garcia, Charlie, and many of the ranch hands attended, along with neighbors from surrounding properties. Even Montgomery made an appearance, arriving late but bringing expensive gifts for the bride and groom, perhaps his way of extending an olive branch. Tabitha wore a gown of ivory silk, ordered from San Antonio, with lace at the collar and cuffs. Russell, almost unrecognizable in a new black suit, stood tall and proud as he spoke his vows in a voice that carried across the assembled guests without hesitation or uncertainty. "I, Russell James Blackburn, take you, Tabitha and Vance, to be my lawfully wedded wife. To have and to hold, from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death parts us. This is my solemn vow." As Tabitha repeated the words, looking up into the face of the man who had captured her heart so unexpectedly, she felt a profound sense of rightness. This was where she belonged, with this man, these children, this life. After the ceremony, there was a feast spread on tables under the oak trees, with music provided by some of the ranch hands who played fiddle and guitar. As the afternoon shadows lengthened, Russell led Tabitha in a dance, his movements surprisingly graceful for such a large man. "Happy, Mrs. Blackburn?" he asked, holding her close as they moved to the music. "Completely, Mr. Blackburn," she replied, her heart so full it seemed it might overflow. "Though I'm still getting used to my new name." "It suits you," he said, his blue eyes warm with love. "Better than I deserve, having you take my name." "I disagree," she said firmly. "I'm proud to be your wife, Russell, prouder than I can say." His arms tightened around her, and he bent to brush his lips against her forehead, a gesture of tenderness that still surprised her, coming from a man once known only for his harshness. "I love you, Tabitha, more than I have words to express." "I love you too," she whispered back. "With all my heart." As the music played on, and the Texas sunset painted the sky in glorious shades of gold and crimson, Tabitha looked around at the gathering Emma and Billy dancing together with more enthusiasm than skill. Mrs. Garcia directing the serving of food, Charlie and the other young men eyeing the local girls with hopeful expressions, Judge Wilson deep in conversation with neighboring ranchers. This was her family now, her community, her home. Not the life she had imagined when she left Boston, but infinitely better, richer, and more meaningful than anything she could have planned for herself. And at the center of it all was Russell, her husband, her partner, her love. The meanest cowboy in Texas, who had fallen to his knees for her in the most important way a man could. By opening his heart, embracing vulnerability, and choosing love over loneliness. As night fell and lanterns were lit around the yard, Russell drew her away from the celebration toward the porch of their new home. In the soft glow of lamplight, he took both her hands in his. "I've been thinking," he said, his expression serious, "about the future, about what we're building here." "What have you been thinking?" she asked, curious at his tone. "That I want to make this ranch something special, not just a place to raise cattle, but a home for children who need one." His eyes held hers, gauging her reaction. Children like Emma and Billy once were. Orphans of the war, or those who have lost their families to sickness or accident. There are too many such children being raised in institutions or bound out as servants when what they really need is family. Tabitha felt a surge of love so powerful it nearly overwhelmed her. This man, whom she had once been sent to civilize, possessed a depth of compassion that humbled her. "Russell, that's a wonderful idea," she said earnestly. "We have the land, the resources, the skills between us. We could give them education, practical training, and most importantly, love and security. The relief on his face told her he had been uncertain of her reaction. You'd be willing to take on more children. Beyond Emma and Billy, more than willing, she assured him. Eager, even. Teaching has always been my calling, but this would be something more meaningful, creating a true home for children who need it most. Russell gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in his world. Have I told you lately that you're remarkable, Tabitha Blackburn? She smiled against his chest. Not in the last hour or so. A serious oversight on my part, he murmured, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. One I intend to rectify thoroughly and regularly for the rest of our lives. I'll hold you to that promise, Mr. Blackburn, she said, tilting her face up to his. As his lips met hers in a kiss that spoke of both passion and tenderness, Tabitha knew with absolute certainty that she had found her true purpose, and her true love not in the drawing rooms of Boston, but under the vast skies of Texas, with a man whose rough exterior had hidden the most remarkable heart she had ever known. Years later, the Blackburn Ranch became known throughout Texas, not just for its fine cattle and horses, but for its school that welcomed children who had nowhere else to go. Under Tabitha's guidance, the educational program flourished, combining traditional academics with practical skills that would serve the children well in whatever future they chose. Russell, once feared as the meanest cowboy in Texas, became respected as a fair and principled rancher who gave second chances to those society had discarded, not just children, but adults too, hiring men others wouldn't consider and treating them with the respect that brought out their best. Emma and Billy grew into confident, capable young adults, secure in the knowledge that they were loved for exactly who they were. Emma, with her sharp mind and determined spirit, eventually attended university in Austin, her own choice, made when she was ready. Billy, who shared Russell's affinity for horses and land management, became his partner in running the ranch. And on quiet evenings, when the day's work was done and the children were settled, Tabitha and Russell would sit together on the porch of their home, hands linked as they watched the Texas sunset paint the sky with fire and gold. Did you ever imagine this life? Russell would sometimes ask, his voice soft with wonder even after all their years together. Never, Tabitha would reply honestly. But I can't imagine any other life now. This is where I was meant to be, with you, with our family under this endless Texas sky. And Russell, the man who had once guarded his heart behind walls of anger and distrust, would draw his wife close and thank whatever fate or providence had sent Tabitha Vance to tame the meanest cowboy in Texas, not by changing who he was, but by loving him enough to help him become the man he was always meant to be.